Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of Two Heels.
Take
All
two.
right. All right. Take three. Let me get a sip of my seltzer here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Two Heels and a Face Wrestling Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to hopefully keep it 30 minutes, right? The time right now is 8:10. The date
It's
is
just
Wednesday.
the two of us.
It's Wednesday, January 13th. Chris, have you had a few pops already?
No,
No?
no.
You're on your first
I'm on my first Corona premiere.
okay. Chris, what are we doing on today's episode? I think this episode was your idea, so I want to know where the inspiration came from and allow you to introduce it.
Sure. So my idea was like, look, we're obviously we're starting the year off 2021. Hopefully it's better than 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But as I looked at like some stats, like how did we perform throughout the year? A lot of people posted in Instagram their top 9. I didn't go that far, so not a whole lot of credit towards me in those things. But I figure that like our fan base or our listener base, it's weird to call them fans, but just our listener base has definitely grown over the years. It's nearly 4 years of Two Heels and a Face. I think the quote unquote anniversary of Two Heels and a Face is somewhere in the middle of February, so maybe right around Valentine's Day.
I think it was early
Uh,
March. Was it the middle of February?
I think based on
Yeah.
the episode when it went up or something, it could have been March maybe.
Yeah.
Uh,
Maybe it was early
Maybe
February.
beginning of March, end of February, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But my thing is like our listener base having like the numbers are increasing, and that's good, even in a weird world like the one we live in today. And we usually jump on, you do your intro, hand it over to me, what I've been up to, haven't done shit, just work, been at home, and then we jump into either if we have a guest or we'll talk about a show that we attended to or recap the show, etc. Like that's just been our thing with the buffet line episodes and
Right.
things like that. But I don't think we've stopped to kind of like reintroduce ourselves and who we are and what like the transformation of the show. I think early on, you know, maybe 6 7 months in, we like really defined our style, because we had or Two Heels and Face had a not traditional podcast startup, I think. And
Sure.
just I'm like, let's just talk to our fan base, our listener base of how we got started, who we are, kind of reintroducing ourselves to those who we haven't met, because of COVID, we haven't been out to shows, and that's where we would normally meet all the wrestling familia.
Yeah, that's true. So we're gonna take a step back here. Um, you know, yeah, usually we talk about what's been new. Chris is like, well, I'm having 7 more kids. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And then we just hop
This
right
is the
into it.
last one. Yep, last
but
one, I promise.
allow us to reintroduce ourselves. But no, we're gonna take a step back and we're not that's where we're going to try to keep it to 30 minutes because I don't think there's a ton of people out there that really just want to hear us talk about ourselves. That's one thing we really try not to do hard on this podcast. It's the podcast is for the people listening. It's about the show, it's about the wrestlers, and it's about the person who's labeled as the guest, right, on the interview. um, but you're right, we have gained new followers. We haven't met these people in person. um, we get a trickle every now and then. New wrestlers that we've never heard of will follow us and things like that. But we want to give you a tiny bit of history lesson and kind of see how far we come. And this is going to be kind of like a reflection episode,
Yeah.
if you will. So I hope it's a little bit entertaining. And I think some credit goes to like the Juice Pro Wrestling guys who we will definitely have an episode with in 2021, for the inspiration behind this, right? It
That's
wasn't.
that's 100% true. I listened to that episode with Stratton where he gives the history of the podcast and how he got involved in the industry and how like his passion and love for independent wrestling grew because of the podcast. So I was like, yeah, you know what? Like, and we've met these guys, we've talked to them, and we've always tried to coordinate something to make a collaboration episode of some sort. Hasn't happened. It will happen soon, but definitely, that's what also sparked the idea of like, yeah, we also need to reintroduce ourselves to the listener base.
Yeah. So that's what we're gonna do on this podcast. I think it's gonna be a little bit more free form than we usually do, but I guess let's introduce what, like, if someone, Chris, if someone were to say, oh, you have a podcast, can you tell me what that podcast is about and how it's different? What are some of
It's
the things
it's
that
a
you would?
wrestling it's a wrestling podcast, right? Like, oh, wrestling, WWE, and the Attitude Era, and I'm like, yes, but no. Because that's usually where people's minds go to, and that's where my mind used to go to. Um, we several times over the years talked about the lull period of us, like being wrestling fans and growing up and not looking at wrestling the same way, and then something sparked us to either get back into WWE or whatever product was out there, whatever we would want to watch, and that kind of sparked my love back into wrestling, which it was mainly I want to see Lucha Underground. um, but if people were asking me about the podcast, I would say that yeah, we talk about wrestling. It's a wrestling podcast, but we mainly focus on the indie scene, and more specifically Chicagoland wrestling, right? And then I'll obviously mention freelance wrestling, Sella Pro, Warrior Wrestling, AAW, um Gali Lucha. Did I miss any?
Did you say freelance?
Freelance Underground.
Yeah.
So the promotions that we often go to, because we enjoy the product and we like to be in the crowd. It's just a different feeling that I also discovered, around 2015ish, early 2015ish maybe, or 14.
Hmm.
Because I didn't know about the indie scene. Like
No, neither
I
did
would
I.
hear about like things happening, but not ever attended a show.
Yeah, I think you can even take it one step back further where we I got back in the I'm here right now because Sting returns to Survivor Series.
A couple months ago, right? A couple weeks ago, returned to AEW.
To AEW, you
AEW.
mean? Yeah. No, I'm here because Sting returned to Survivor Series, honestly. Like, we have this because Sting returned to Survivor Series, because that was probably the first domino to fall. That got me back into WWE. And then I saw on Twitter, I saw a flyer or a show poster for an AEW show, and it was the one with Mick Foley on it, and at the
Hmm.
Berwyn Eagles Club. And I was like, holy shit, like this stuff. And then I was like, I kind of knew about NXT, or there was other people on that show that I feel like maybe were in NXT at one point, or like, or were on Lucha Underground. Like, Ricochet was on that show, and I think he was on Lucha Underground at the time.
Hmm.
And I was just like, this is so weird. Like, how are all these people who are sort of on my television also wrestling in the Berwyn Eagles Club? Like, why is that like allowed to exist? I was like, that's really cool though. So I took some of my casual wrestling fan friends, and we were in line. I think I was like standing right next to you in line, and because I knew you through
And
a
we
friend I
didn't know
used to
each
work
other.
with. We
We
didn't
knew
know each
of
other.
each other.
Yes, because I worked with a guy named Hector, and he knew you. And I was like, it got out that at my work or something that I was going to this show, because I was
Hmm.
like the wrestling fan in the office. And then, because people's minds are blown sometimes when they meet a person around my age that watches and likes wrestling. Like, people's minds are blown. They're like, this stuff still exists. And yeah, then Hector was like, this guy, not AEW Hector, but a different Hector, was telling me to like look out for you. And I think like I think I was like right next to you in line at one point or something like that. Like, our paths definitely crossed that night
Hmm.
in the Berwyn Eagles Club. And then that's where it started. Then it was like a chain reaction of like discovering this whole world, going to all of it. And then at the time was doing a different podcast that never got off the ground. And we had you on that as a we had you on as a guest of that
Yeah.
podcast. And then a guy I was doing that podcast with we kind of like brought you in as because one guy quit. Initially it was me and two other people. It was a podcast called Layeth the Mat Down, because one of the guys' name was Matt. I thought it was a decent name. those two guys, one of those guys quit. Then it was me and another guy. We brought you in as the third person, and then that other guy quit, and then it was me and you, and then we kind of made something of this. So that was kind of the origin story, so to speak. But I'm here. I want to point out that I'm here because of Sting, and it's all about Sting. That's the whole reason I'm saying this story.
Hence the name Two Heels in the Face. Like a lot of people have asked us, where does the name Two Heels in the Face come from? And it was because originally the idea of Two Heels in the Face, it was supposed to be three guys, two heels in a face.
Yes. So we actually thought of that name at Bourbon Street while eating dinner before an AEW show. Because we started going to these AEW shows. We're like, holy shit, this is awesome. We knocked off like 5 in a row. This is back when I used to go to wrestling, actually. And we were sitting there eating like chicken fingers or something before a show. Like everyone was eating dinner because it's Bourbon Street. It's like 7 different things in one. And there's 3 of us, and the 2 other guys were a little bit snarkier or smarkier than I am, so to speak. And I was kind of I found myself like being the middleman. They had like a lot of hot, smarky, snark. Like they had a lot of heelish opinions, and then I was like trying to be the positive light. And not to say they're like inherited. They're not very negative people, but that's just kind of like the roles we played when we talked. And I don't know who thought of the name. I want to give myself credit for it, but I'm sure all those 2 people would also give themselves credit for thinking of. But we thought of the name Two Heels in a Face because that's what's on an actual person, right? 2 heels in a face, but then it defined every single person in the podcast. So we have like an initial episode, which I'm like pretty proud of. Even if you go back and listen to that, it's like a really good, well done episode. I think there's a lot of like good opinions.
I think that's episode 1, the Glorious or the Glorious rebrand.
The Glorious rebrand, because we were in the NXT at that time, like very heavily into it.
And this one, Bobby Roode was a shit.
Yes, that's when Bobby Roode was tearing it up, and like we were still obsessed with that theme song. It's still an amazing theme song, or entrance song. But yeah, that's where the name came from. But then it ended up being you and me, and we're like, I don't know what, we probably decided not to rebrand because it's a lot of effort, and maybe like a couple people knew us, so we just kind of said fuck it.
Right, and I think there were a couple episodes that you had already done. Like you didn't get the traction, or like it was hard scheduling. So you ended up doing solo episodes. So there was some content already out there, branded as Two Heels in a Face.
Right.
And then I think I'm like, oh, I'll do a recap. Like, let's do it. I just throw the idea of doing a recap for an AAW show. Because that was also like, so I'll take a step back and say that how I got back into wrestling after so many years. I had a slow dip into wrestling at the hype of I want to say it was CM Punk days, and I wasn't even a big CM Punk fan in those times. It was my brother. My brother at that age probably was like maybe 8, 9 years old, and I was able to work and get some money. So like I remember like we would make lines for Ticketmaster and try to get like front row tickets. Because even though like I wasn't watching wrestling, I'm like, oh, I remember that. And I always as a kid wanted to be front row. I still haven't, but we got pretty decent seats. And I remember taking him to a Raw, and like he was so happy. Like if we start getting sentimental and shit, and I'm like thinking of my brother, like that was the moment where he was like super happy and like thanked me at the end of the night. I think it was a birthday present, not a Christmas one. But anyway, so like I dipped into wrestling just to kind of enjoy it with him a little bit, but wasn't really watching on a weekly basis until somebody randomly posted that Stone Cold had a podcast. And is when I was starting to discover what a podcast was.
Okay.
And I think Stone Cold was maybe on his like 10th episode.
Oh wow.
So I digested that shit extra quick. I'm like, I listened nonstop like if it was a Netflix series. So I'm like, this is so cool. Like, I Stone Cold was my guy, was the guy I always, like I was behind during the Attitude Era or whatnot. And then I started just talking about like, oh, and I heard this about, Stone Cold talked about this during his podcast with one of my friends. And then it's like, oh, I used to be into wrestling too. Like, because these are friends that we made over time, that during high school or whatever, that I didn't know like that they like wrestling too. So all of a sudden, like, and we had him on, Alan Perez.
Yes.
Um, he, me and him started talking about wrestling, and he's like, dude, we should check out one of these shows, because we would see flyers at like local grocery stores or whatever.
The
And we
Flyer
ended,
Crew, baby. The Flyer
yeah.
Crew. Need that show
Uh,
posted.
we our first show was a Blitz WrestleFest
Okay.
with Kurt Angle.
Okay.
Um, and we went to that show. We had lots of fun, and then we bump into another poster somewhere for the Berwyn Eagles Club. Samoa Joe was coming. He was a huge Samoa Joe fan. I knew a little bit about him, but I'm like, sure, I'll go. We had fun last time. And that was my first AAW show. I think it was April of 2014, 2015. And ever since, it's like, let's make this a monthly thing. It's not bad. Like, we got beer, we got, a great show. Like, I think
Right.
for that show, we had Champa versus um what was his name? His indie name. Can't remember, but Aleister Black. I didn't know who
Tommy
those two
End.
guys were. Tommy End.
Yeah.
Didn't know who those two guys were. Probably at the end of the show, you asked me what their names were. I didn't know, but I remember that I enjoyed that match a whole lot.
Yeah.
And then just AEW kind of just made me go back to the Berwyn Eagles Club or Bourbon Street, and then it's when Hector had mentioned you. Eventually, we met up. I got to meet Jim and Matt. Um, and that's kind of like what resurfaced this passion of pro wrestling. And it's so different to enjoy it from this perspective of indie wrestling, where it's not like
Yeah.
a lot of people or you will talk to and they'll reference WWF, WWE. But it's like, nah, the wrestling that I like is more of the one I get to go see locally, and in a couple of years I'll probably see them in one of these promotions.
Well, funny you say that. So I think that this is in our Twitter bio, and I'm actually very proud of our Twitter bio. We're not like super big on Twitter, but I think we built a decent organic following. I don't even know how many followers we have. It really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
But our Twitter bio says we are a wrestling podcast that believes wrestling is a buffet. So just that first part is building on what you just said, which is, and it's okay. And we have episodes, like deeper episodes that have talked about WWE, NXT, etc.
Yeah, Royal Rumble.
Yep.
I think there was a time where I spoke about the Total Deletion and Impact a couple years back.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, exactly. What I'm getting at is we found this entire other world of wrestling that existed, and it's totally cool if you want to come on and talk about different types of wrestling, other types of wrestling. But I think our part of the buffet line we've been feasting at has been the independent type of stuff, and that's kind of what we. I feel like we have built an environment on our episodes where it's okay to talk about anything related, tangentially related to wrestling that you want, and we are just have dove into a different sect, if you will, than a lot of people. A lot of people don't know about this. A lot of people don't know that this type of wrestling exists. Like I recently told a coworker, like not last year, because last year was basically a complete wash, but in 2019, and he's just like, wait, above Lulu Cafe in Logan Square, like they have wrestling matches up there. He's like, I eat at Lulu Cafe in Logan Square all the time. He's like, there's wrestling matches right. I was like, we're walking outside. I was like, right there. And I just like pointed above it. I was like, that's where it happens right there. And his mind is blown, like completely blown that happened. So yeah. So I think the first part, wrestling was a buffet.
And in that term, like I always credit you for it because I hadn't heard it elsewhere. But just kind of looking at wrestling like a buffet, like when you go to a buffet, you don't necessarily eat everything or just one thing.
No,
you go for what you like.
Yeah,
and you indulge, and you nearly passed out if you want to, or you could be that person that just goes and eats a little bit of salad and says that they're full. That's fine too.
That's fine too. But yeah, I grab a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of frog legs, if you will. I've had frog legs at a Chinese buffet before. I just want.
Put some ranch on your,
I'm still alive.
microwavable pizza. Like that's
Yeah,
fine too.
absolutely. Um, but yeah, it kind of it's important to us. That phrase is important to us, and creating a non-judgmental environment is important to us. Um,
Because we also entered the podcast game when everybody wanted to have a podcast and everybody was talking about wrestling. Like I think that's also like it was the spike was going that way, it was going up
sure.
where all these podcasts were on. And
Well, I'm
I've
sure even
always
now too, because it's probably continuing to go up. I'm assuming, but
yeah, whether that's podcast or YouTube channels, and everybody has their opinion, but we definitely try to stay away from like the negativeness of what we didn't like. So we like to look at what we did, what we do like. Let's talk about that and have a good time, because we're not professional wrestlers.
no.
We're fans. We enjoy what we enjoy, and it's always easier to just you know enjoy what you're watching versus torturing yourself. If you're not liking Raw, don't watch Raw.
Yeah,
Right? There's other things that you can enjoy. That doesn't mean you're gonna hate WWE, because Royal Rumble will come around, and if I'm not subscribed to the network, I'll subscribe and watch the Royal Rumble.
that
But
is coming up.
yeah,
I'm kind of. I would watch a Rumble now that football is winding down and the Bears are out, which I want to talk about today because there's a press conference that happened and it just
uh,
made me very depressed. I wanted to bang my head against my desk. But um,
well, let's talk about what you like.
so no, that's an important thing. That's an important thing that you said though, is our ability to try to stay as positive as possible. We talk about things we don't like, but then we really it's probably like 10-15% things we didn't like, and then the rest of the percentage is like positive things that we
Well, yeah, like you're not gonna like everything that you talk about.
yeah.
Like you mentioned the negative, but that doesn't mean you dwell on it or try to rebook it, or like it does. I just feel like that's not us.
Yeah,
And I think also what
most of
attracted
the
me
time it's not.
after talking to you and getting to know you and deciding that we're doing this together is that how do we become how do we show up to this podcast world in a different light? And to me, it's like, well, let's cover what we go to, what we do watch. And if we focus on the indie scene, it's a different, we're shining the light on some talent that people might not know of.
Yeah, there's multiple benefits to it. You're right. So I don't think you can do and I want to point out too that we're not reporters either.
Right.
So if anyone thinks that, you're completely dead and utterly wrong. But I've had a conversation with a person at a show, and it's just like he's like, "Why wouldn't you guys talk about that?" I was like, "Well, we're not reporters. I mean, that's common news. It's not our job to report the news." Um, so, but yeah, what you were talking about was shit. What were you talking about? Remind me. You just said
No, so I was talking
the
about
ability to be different, right?
yeah, how do we show up here and provide something different? um because everybody's trying to talk about what happened in Raw, and if you do,
Yes.
that's great, but it's just I'm not watching Raw, so why am I going to force myself to sit down and watch Raw?
Yeah. So there's
um
multiple. I think there's multiple benefits to
mhm,
what makes us different. Is we talk about a lot of shows that don't get a ton of publicity compared to like an episode of AEW Dynamite or Raw,
right.
and I think there's multiple benefits to it. Multiple benefits are yes, you build a podcast around things you want to talk about, so it doesn't feel like a job. We're
What do
going
you
to these
like?
shows. What do you like? Yeah, exactly. Shout out to Jeremy Zaha. What do you like podcast? We're going to these shows, so yeah, we want to talk about them. We're meeting these people, so yes, we want to have them on. And a huge benefit also is that we brighten someone's day. We brighten a wrestler's day. We brighten a fan's day. By the way, we've had more fans on than wrestlers, which I think is also something we're proud of. By bringing them on and letting them share their opinion, we're not. And I want to just
Because
point out
it's
that yeah,
mhm.
go ahead. It
No, it's funny that like the Chicago wrestling crowd, you see them in a lot of shows, right? So it's like we don't always have to have a wrestler. Like if Tyler, we saw Tyler everywhere every month, and that's how we got to know him, Tyler Ray. And we finally had him on, and it's like, yeah, like I want to get to know you at a different level, not just at a wrestling show over a beer, but like let's talk about it. And also he, has inserted himself in the industry as well. We've talked to Hank 312 several times,
And
as an official.
they're such
Yeah,
great contributors. Like they're such great contributors because they go to these shows and they have stronger opinions, and they can be a little bit more free will with their opinions because they're not like in the backs. They're not like a wrestler, and it's not dirt. We're not looking for dirt. We've never been a
right.
fan of dirt, but it's just like we're not bringing in someone we don't have a rapport with that is just going to have an awkward conversation with us, and that every single podcast in the world. Once again, I'm not like hating on anyone, but I'm saying like this is what makes a genuine conversation is you bring in someone who has met you before and who can build a rapport with you naturally because you know that person, and who experiences the same things that you do sometimes, or maybe experience the same show but from a different side of the curtain. So it's like we're not DMing your 5-10 most popular wrestlers begging them to come on because we've never met these people in person.
And
You know what I mean?
one I gotta say, one of the things that you know working with Charlie, he was, pre-COVID, when the world was normal, he was adamant about, like, look, if we're gonna talk to if we're gonna have somebody on, let's build a rapport and try to have them in person. Like, let's not do, phone calls or, Skype interviews or Zoom interviews. Now that has changed over the years. That's
Sure.
because the whole world has changed,
Right.
and we are here talking to you guys over Zoom. But but I think that was really important. At first, I'm like, man, why are you flexible? But at the same time, like, you have a point. You have a point, and that made it for a more enjoyable conversation, because at the end of the day, us doing this podcast is not like, sponsorships are pouring, and we're telling people like, no,
No,
we can't promote you this week.
we're in the red, bro. In terms of like money we've spent, like it's not about like
Right.
we just live in the red. And it's not about like
It
making
brings a
money.
different type of enjoyment,
Yeah.
to create this and to bring these conversations to you guys. And um, you know, having those in-person conversations is 10 times better than having a phone call, at least for me. And if you would have asked me this 4 years ago, I would have been like, well, phone call, conversation, in person, same thing.
Yeah.
For the purpose of a podcast, but it's not. And
It's
I think,
yeah.
97% of all of our episodes are, if not 98, 99%, just because 2020 alone threw a curveball. But other than that, mostly everything was in person.
Right, right. And no, I I think like yes, I think that's something that like I can be like super critical of myself and our podcast at times, but I think it just we have a lot better conversations with people in person and people we know. And I think like if you're creating content, you gotta at least look back at some of it and ask yourself, where can I get better? And it's not to say that we haven't had like awkward ass conversations on this podcast, like 100% we've had. And then we realized, well, maybe it's because we didn't really know that person that well. And it was kind of a
Hmm.
cold interview. It wasn't like a warm interview.
Yeah, we had our fair share of cold interviews. We talked to
Yeah.
Brandy Rhodes. It's not like we would
Yeah.
see her on a monthly basis.
That was something, huh? I rushed
Right.
over to your house through traffic. We were like had to like reschedule a time because we had like the time zones mixed up or something like
Yes, we
that.
rescheduled Brandy, you guys.
And then she rescheduled for us. No, it was for a publication that
Uh-huh.
I was contributing to at the time, which is a Diva Dirt. So that's why we basically landed her. We're not that cool, but it was like a 15-minute thing that I basically drove an hour and 15 minutes for a 50-minute conversation with Brandy Rose. I had a blast though, and that was really cool for you to host me, and like that was a good experience for us.
Yeah, because out of that, like, we also talked to Deanna Perazzo, we talked to Chelsea Green,
Right.
through Diva Dirt. So
Kelly, I think.
yeah, Kelly.
That was a really good one. She was very generous with her time. And she was really, I think, very down to earth. And she talked to me for like, I want to say the episode might have been like an hour. So she gave a lot of her time away. So that was a really good one.
Yeah, and so I mean, we had our fair share of wrestlers, right? Like again, a lot of these, I'm looking at the list in front of me, and a lot of these guys, guys and gals, we got to know a little bit before getting them on the podcast, and I think that's pretty cool. Um, and then on the other side, we also have, what would you call it? Fans, promoters, supporters, contributors, etc. Where like those two lists are pretty lengthy. I mean, we are on our um episode 181 right now, so we're nearing the 200s.
That's pretty cool, man. 181 episodes. We haven't quit. We've taken weeks off where we needed it. Like a lot of people don't get 181
Anything.
segments through something before
Hmm.
they just move on to something else, and that's okay if you're that person. I mean, I'm very fickle with my hobbies, um, but I think honestly, I'm super proud. This sounds boastful. I'm super proud of you. I'm super proud of myself as well for like continuing to do this. And we've had
It's
bumps in the road. 2020 was a huge bump in the road. It never really felt like anyone was listening to us because we couldn't have like fans or wrestlers in person, and like numbers were down just because like less people were listening to us in their car and stuff like that. So there's definitely times in 2020 where I was down on the podcast, but we trudged through it for sure.
for sure, and looking at 2021 is still very uncertain, right? But that's why I think also this episode was important, just to look back. And whenever somebody would ask us, like, what's a piece of advice, when starting a podcast, I think we both have said the same thing of just first be consistent.
Yep.
And we were very diligent about being consistent for a long time. And of course, life gets in the way, and that's fine. But I think, for the past, once we really got the ball rolling, we were pumping episodes. At first, it was bi-weekly, then it turned into weekly because there was just a lot of wrestling happening. And there were even weeks where we would probably throw an extra one in there because we wanted to also make sure that, certain promotions were being talked about.
Yeah, catch a person at a certain time. Someone was only available this time, or things like that. So think of how many hours I mean we've put into this, um, and
At
that's
least
on like
181 hours,
at least the
at
very
least.
least. But no, like I think we've built something that we should definitely be proud of because we put so much time and
the
effort into it.
the buffet line style didn't start from the beginning. Like that's something
No,
that got developed over time.
was that you mostly your idea? I want to say, were you
Um,
the
uh,
brainchild behind that?
Maybe I think I started like, let's keep the theme going, because we were like, okay, wrestling's a buffet, but we can just say that, like, how do we put that on brand with what we do? And that's how we came up with the buffet line style of episodes, when we would have a guest, and that would be our way of getting to know them, to take them through the wrestling buffet line.
Yeah,
The snack size episodes that have now turned in. So now, if you think, or I think about a snack size episode that we're doing, is basically recapping a show. Before, it was like, oh, it was going to be a 20-30 minute quick take on whatever's going on in wrestling.
which we
Never
can't do.
accomplished that.
Which we
No.
can't do because look now, like we started at 8:10 and we're at 8:40 and we're already 3 minutes over time. Like I'm not rushing us, but like we just can't do it. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Snack size, that just means that we're recamping an episode. Buffet line style means we have a guest and we're taking them through the buffet line if it's the first time having them on. Um, yeah, so like those things just kind of get developed as we go on. Where, Modelo has been in our branding for a very long time.
Yeah. I've been
Um,
slacking on that because my tum tum gets upset, but absolutely like and that's the second. So I would say like the two C's are the most important. I've said this before. You're probably like rolling your eyes at me. Chris has a lot of patience with me and basically lets me go on rants, and I confuse myself and I send emails to myself like when I'm drunk and like as a reminder, and they don't mean anything. And there's lots of weird stuff that happens that I do. But um, the second C, you said consistency. The second C is community.
absolutely.
Modelo's buy, like drinking Modelo's at these shows, buying people Modelo's at these shows, meeting people at these shows that then listen to the podcast, meeting wrestlers at these shows where we buy a shirt from them, and then we build a rapport, and then like 6 months later they might come on the podcast. Like that is community. So like it's about involving yourself in a positive way,
Mhm.
in a way that you can contribute something to the community. It's not like we don't meet someone with an alternative agenda in mind. We meet someone because they seem like an interesting person, or they're a wrestler, or they help out with a certain thing. We talk to them about it, and then usually they're a good person. You know, we haven't met, there's been some bad apples. We haven't met many. And then, but we want to, and then our contribution back to the community is this show, is the people we know, is like, we know is, you know, the time we spend at the show to like, just talk to them about how their life's been going. Yeah. So that's what we bring back. And I think it's about involving yourself in a community, investing in it, building it up. Even Kirby, once again, it sounds like I'm putting ourselves over, but even Kirby when we had him on recently was like, what you guys do is, and then when he said that way, he's like, what you guys do is great, because like, we're trying to build up these shows as much, like shows and these people as much as possible. And we want to put them over. We want to put them over because they're good people, and they're good at what they. So
I mean, look,
yeah.
like we hashtag our episodes ended with hashtag push Paco for I don't know how many episodes.
And then he won a belt.
He won a belt, got a mini documentary
Yeah.
on YouTube by Rob called hashtag push Paco. And you know, it's one of those things that like that was cool. Like, I mean, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, you see the fruits of your labor, a little, like tiny. I'm not saying like we're not taking credit for
Yeah.
that, but like a small little part that like we cheered for Paco. He got a run. A stupid idea, the hashtag idea that we had becomes part of a YouTube video. Like you feel like you help build one brick out of that whole house. So
Exactly. Like we had Monix on trying to get to know what Project Monix was when he was barely launching that. Was able to kind of brainstorm with us, and you know, he got his character out there, and we were able to, you know, be a pebble or a brick or whatever, and I was able to help him with with a design for his t-shirt.
right,
Like I felt proud of that. Like
you should
I
have.
whatever that meant for him, but I'm like, hey, I was able to do something for somebody that's trying to live out their dream, you know?
Yeah,
And
fuck
like
yeah.
little
That's what
things
it's
like
all
that.
about.
Yeah, like little things like that is what I'm like, this is why this is so cool.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's one of those things, like even, you know, in business, my business partner is not somebody that I sought out and I said, let's be business partners. It just happened. And I think in this journey, like we didn't seek each other out. It's just happened. And
yeah,
it's been working out great. I mean, I think we have a really good balance on different views and opinions. And we have made it work so far. And I'm proud of what we've done. So yeah, I mean, this whole podcast is for new listeners to get to know us and others just to hear us put ourselves over, I
yeah.
guess. And we often don't like to do that, but you just can't help yourself when you're looking at a list of, you know, 32 wrestlers that we interviewed. Might not be a lot for 4 years, but those 32 conversations meant a lot to me.
100%. Well, that's not, it's not 32 conversations. Some of those wrestlers have been on 2 or 3 times.
Right.
So,
That's true.
but 32 unique wrestlers.
And collectively,
Mhm.
it's, you know, it's 32 wrestlers that we've had on, 38 other people that are, you know, friends, fans, promoters,
Refs,
refs, announcers,
people who ring the
people in
bell.
the industry, and people that go to these shows and drink Modelo's with us, or just, you know, talk about wrestling, and that's that second C that is community.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, one last thing on that on the stats. We did a little hashtag sabermetrics. The 103 of our 180 episodes have been about independent shows, local / semi-local, or something, or an independent show we watched online. and that's over 50% of 57% of our episodes, which I think is like when looking at those stats, I'm super proud we've had more non-wrestlers on than wrestlers, because I think that makes us different. And 57% of our episodes have been about promoting independent wrestling shows. That is awesome, honestly. Like, that fits who we are. Like, I'm not surprised at that stat, but it's cool to see of a concrete number, you know?
Absolutely, man. I mean, and it's been enjoyable. At the end of the day, like all of this has been enjoyable. Like it's not like, yeah, sometimes we scramble around to find time to record, and it's like, oh shit, today's, Tuesday or Wednesday, we're gonna record, and I gotta make sure I get my work done or push work to the side for a little bit. And it could feel a little stressful, but once really we, sit down and are about to record, it's like, okay, like this is cool. And then having those conversations or recapping a show when it's just the two of us, like that's what I like.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we've gotten to know each other so much better in doing this. Yeah, I mean, I made a new close friend out of it. So that's a huge benefit. And I think the biggest compliment we've maybe ever received, I think, was from our friend Doug Enriquez. He said you make the Chicago wrestling scene feel bigger. And I think that to me was like one of the best compliments we've ever received. I think that just like made everything we kind of do worth it. And some of the conversations we have with these people too make it worth it. But I don't know if you remember, he said that to us at a Warrior Wrestling event or Fan Fest. And I thought that was like one of the coolest things ever, because I think it's a huge compliment for like the work we put in.
I don't remember, but usually at Warrior Wrestling shows, and that's the funny thing. Usually, I think I drink the least at Warrior Wrestling shows, so he might have told you on the side. He never wants to talk to
No,
me
I think
as
that's
far in a
it's
in a,
we
in a,
have
in a
the audio.
positive light of the Chicago indie scene. He gives me a lot of crap, but I know he's just messing with me. Um, but man, so real quick, like just to kind of like close this off, like what are
Definitely.
some good, like let's start off by what was your first wrestling like this is a question that all podcasters do, or a
Mhm.
wrestling podcast, which is like, what is the first wrestling memory that you have? And then
Just
out
in
of these,
general or about our
yeah,
podcast?
like whenever you think about wrestling, what is that first instance that you acknowledge, like, oh shit, this is cool stuff?
Shit.
And then the other part of that question is, what's a memorable moment during these 4 years of Two Heels and a Face?
Okay. The 4 years. Shit. I want to say the Jessica Havoc interview. Um, she had just won the AEW first AEW Women's Champion. I think it was a new belt,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time didn't know
And
us.
LaSalle.
Yeah, and LaSalle, she didn't know who we were. Trent, shout out to Trent for like setting that up, because he basically helped us out at that. I think she was just so elated that she won, and then we got to talk to her. She gave us our time, and it was just she felt like super vindicated, and it was kind of like a big fuck you to all her doubters and haters. And I think she was just so happy during that interview. It made me really happy. And then we had like
Mhm.
a whole hour drive to talk about that interview on the way back. And I think I was just like over the moon. I was like, God, that was such a good interview. Like, I felt her energy. I felt so happy for her. I think that was one of my favorite moments doing this, because I think it was cathartic for her. She just got to spew out all these thoughts she had, and we just ingested them and put them on in audio. Um, and I should have probably ended with that. But honestly, my first memory of really liking wrestling was the switching between Raw and Nitro as a kid. Like, I couldn't like decide which one, and I just remember sitting on my floor. I used to sit like Indian style on my floor, like a little
Mhm.
kid does, and I just kept switching back and forth. And I had this Sting VHS, and I watched the shit out of that, dude. I had to watch that thing like 35 times, this Sting VHS. And it was like talking about all some Surfer Sting to Crow Sting to Wolfpack Sting.
Is it like an official Sting tape?
It's an official Sting tape. Yeah, I watched
Okay.
the fuck out of that VHS. Like that thing was worn. So those are some of my earliest, I think, memories of. And then having people over for pay-per-views and stuff. And like, I remember where there was one pay-per-view I hosted at my house, and we all had to pick a winner of each match before the bell rang. That was the stipulation. Like you had to pick before the bell
That's
rang.
cool.
And the person with the worst record, we got to do wrestling moves on that person. So they had to succumb to us doing power bombs and stuff to them.
See, this all came full circle when you started the fantasy wrestling league.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
at the end, the loser took a finisher from the winner.
That's probably where I probably had that in the back of my head. But that guy who took the DDT was actually at my house when
Oh, no way.
this happened, because he jumped off the top rope, and he's a little bit of a bigger guy.
Mhm.
You won't mind me saying that, but he's a little bit of a bigger guy, and he landed on the kid who had the worst record. And the kid was like, I think he was hurt for a little bit, but maybe cried a little bit, but like he wasn't like seriously injured. And so we just beat it was a little mean too. I sound like a jackass right now, but it was just like, there was like 6-8 people who came over to watch his pay-per-view. He had the worst record because he chose, there was like a Taz Spike Dudley match or something. And like, I was like, for sure, Spike Dudley, like, this is wrestling. Spike Dudley and Taz are going to find a way to win this match. Like, it was against Test or like some other big dude, maybe Test and Albert or something like that.
TNA.
And I remember picking that one correctly. And we all picked these correctly, except for this kid named Nick. And then Nick had to take a frog splash from the bigger guy and like all these moves. So like, those are like memories like that growing up and watching were some of the stuff that I think I remember the most.
So you gotta answer the questions now.
And I gotta, okay, that's fair. And I'll do it in the same order. And within the last 4 years, I think so one of the cool memories, I guess, that I have is when actually Trent like reached out to us and he said, hey, no one has ever talked on a podcast about AAW and wanted to get to know us because he found us through a random search. So like we hadn't met Trent, otherwise, even though we were going to all these shows. So for somebody to intentionally look for podcasts for AAW and this is probably you're doing with keywords and such, he was able to find us and that like bloomed into a friendship and now we yearly we'll try to do a hot tag episode with the BSB boys.
Right.
So that's cool. But also like when I think about because there's all these little moments, right? Like when we reached out to Steve because we thought that Warrior Wrestling show, the first one,
fake show,
was a fake show, and like,
fake
hey,
show,
is this
dude.
real? Like, let's talk about it. And he was the nicest guy from the beginning, willing to talk to us. Then you have different interviews, like we interviewed Kylie Ray after the first Zello Pro Women's Championship match.
That was a fun one. That was a really cool moment. Yeah.
And then more recently we had Elena Black and Blair Onyx and Missa Kate, the three of them in one episode. We utilized that boardroom really well that time. We had a lot of people on that episode.
Our most popular episode.
And then wanted to talk to Tony Nas, and then Tony was like, can I bring Thunder Rosa with me? We're like, sure. So all these like fun episodes.
She got really mad and stared into not at me, but she got really passionate and stared into my soul with her eyes.
Yeah, like she opened up and it was really, really cool episode. So we have all these like little memories or things that we've done, but I think if I go and I just pick a random episode and listen back, like they're always like little special moments in every episode.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the one would be the time that I took the liberty to change the logo, or at least I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And kind of merged because I initially had just a pro wrestling fan. It was a blog. And I had a logo that utilized that mask, and that was also my way of kind of entering the wrestling world, because I didn't want to merge Christian Romero and wrestling over here and Twitter. So that was my way of like keeping him separate. But eventually I'm like, look, we're two heels in the face and this is me and I like wrestling and it is what it is.
Right.
um but I took that logo, merged it with the two heels in the face version 1 logo, and you were like, oh, that's great, let's go with it. Like, I honestly didn't know what you were gonna think. You're like, nah, like we've already had this for a couple months or whatever, but you were open to it. And I think that just kind of started our branding to be consistent in everything we
Absolutely.
did. um
The artwork you do has been a huge part, I think, of why people even click on our shit.
yeah, probably out of those 180 episodes, I probably designed custom artwork for every episode
Almost.
for about 175 of those.
Yeah.
um some of them I look back and I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? But I'm like, the fact that it's something new every episode is like, okay. um so but now, as far as like the earliest memory of wrestling, it's probably sitting with my grandpa, like in Mexico, watching wrestling, watching lucha libre, like and this might sound weird to some. To some it might be like, yeah, that's the thing you did back in the day. Like, I had to be like 6 or 7, no, yeah, like 6 or 7, handed me a tecate as we were both sitting there. Like, he had a tecate in his hand, I had a tecate in mine, and we were watching wrestling. Like, and that never felt weird to me. It was like, okay.
How did that
um
take? Did it go down smooth? Is it?
so this was the other thing, right? Like, he would be watching TV and I'll be, because I lived with my grandparents until I was 8. Like, I would be running around, I don't know what ages I had. I'll randomly, like, if he left it there, I would just take a little sip and run around and do something else. And they would catch me once in a while and just like, don't do that. But
That's funny.
so when he just, like, handed me the tecate, I was like, okay, like, let's watch some lucha libre. Um
That's great. I love that.
that was on TV. Like, that's what I remember. But then, as far as like, WWF, because I was a WWF guy in the Attitude Era, was I got introduced to WWF through a PlayStation 1 game. I think it was WWF Attitude. And then I'm like, wait, this is also on TV. When is this? How can I watch this? And I would watch it. I would not understand what they would be talking about, but I would just watch the wrestling for wrestling's sake, and the craziness. It blew my mind. Like, I didn't know the language, but I saw Stone Cold kicking ass and drinking beer, and the beer truck all over the McMahons, and like all that. Like, that was pretty cool. I love that shit.
Yeah.
And I think I might have shared this story with you before. Like, my dad once showed up with a VHS box with all the WrestleManias. Like, it was like a special edition VHS box that had WrestleMania from 1 to probably 14 or something like that.
Oh, I don't think I know this story.
And he's like, here. He's like, a buddy of mine told me about that, he just had gotten this, and I got him to let me borrow it for the weekend. So, watch whatever you want, but we need to return it on Monday.
Oh
And he brought
shit.
it on like on a Friday morning, because he used to work overnights. So he showed up on like a Friday morning during the summer, like 6:30 or something in the morning. He's like, he woke me up to tell me like, hey, I'm gonna leave it in the living room. Watch whatever you want, because on Monday I gotta take it back. But I had until Monday night when he went to work, so it's almost like I had an extra day. And I watched a bunch of stuff without me knowing what I was watching. Like, I
Right.
watched, probably, I tried to go in order too, thinking that I was gonna make it. So I probably watched up to like WrestleMania 7 maybe, and then I just started like, let me look for the guys that I've seen already.
Yeah.
So I would look through, and like, I remember like that whole weekend, that's all I did, just going through WrestleMania tapes.
Some of those older WrestleMania matches are hard to get through. Like some of those older WrestleMania
Oh
matches, like
yeah.
1 through 5, those matches are not for me. Like there's a lot, like main event
But
stuff, yes, but like I feel like there's like 12 matches
but that's
leading
the
up to
thing, that
that.
as a kid, you're not smarky. You're not like, oh, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna watch this. You're like,
Right.
fuck it, I got it. I gotta watch it.
Yeah.
And in my Monday routine, I remember perfectly, like, because Monday Night Raw was on, I would watch Triple A from like I think like 5:30 it started until like 7:30, and then they would do like a 30-minute or maybe 6:30. I remember there was a 30-minute break between AAA and WWF, and those 30 minutes there was a recap of what I just watched in AAA, and I will still watch it.
Yeah, of course.
And then I will watch, Monday Night Raw or Raw is War at that point.
Right.
So, and yeah,
Just
like
binging,
eventually my
man.
dad got the black box, and we had people over,
Oh
coming
yeah.
over for the pay-per-views and such. But
And you're in Chicago at this point,
at
or
this time, yeah,
no?
yeah,
Okay.
this whole time,
So I was gonna say, if you got the black box, you're probably in Chicago at this point.
absolutely, yeah.
Definitely. That's great. You're just
That's
binging from the start, binging and boozing from the start, man.
binging and boozing from the start, yeah. And if I was doing something else, I'm sure I had it in the background.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so I think that's a pretty hefty episode of us, the history of Two Heels and a Face. I know there's another episode somewhere with Jim, the other counterpart of Two Heels and a Face, where we had lots of fun. We talked about random stuff. And then we went out to an AEW show, and it was good to catch up with him during that episode. I think that had to be 2019. That was not 2020.
Yeah, we need to have Jim back. I miss Jim.
Yeah, just see how he's doing. And he's the one that brought over the first wrestler that we interviewed, which is Ace Martino.
Wrestling perfection.
Wrestling perfection. That's right. So before I go on another tangent, I think it's time for us to close this episode off. And Charlie, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you know our phone number in case somebody wants to leave a voicemail?
I don't.
Leave us some comments.
I do not. I can look
You
it
do
up.
not. Okay. So that bought me enough time to find it.
Okay.
But yeah, if you wanna, leave us some feedback, leave a voicemail with a question. If it's something that we can answer in a future episode, definitely let
If
us
your
know.
name's D-Ray, you have to
Definitely
leave it.
state your name, just so we know.
or you have to leave. I'm pretty sure D-Ray was that second caller.
I don't know who that mystery caller
It
on our
was
previous
D-Ray.
episode.
It was.
I don't know.
100%. It was D-Ray.
All right. Well, the number to dial is 872-222-7661. Again, that's 872-222-7661. So let us know what you think about this episode, other episodes, or
You just want to call
ask
up and
us any
say, "Yo, this
questions.
show stinks." Go for it.
That's fine too. I think the only thing I say is, don't talk shit about other people. Talk shit about us. That's fine. Other people, then I'll just edit that shit and won't let it fly.
Yeah.
If you want to find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, that's Two Heels and a Face, number 2 Heels and a Face. We have a website where you can go and check out all of our episodes along with other articles in there. We probably would need to do a better job in adding other articles in there, but just check it out. 2heelsandaface.com, number 2 heelsandaface.com.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a sponsor, go to twoheelsandaface.com, click the About Us page, check out our sponsorship packages that we're going to be offering people in 2021. If you're a small business and can't afford it, please do not sponsor us because you need the money right now. If you're a small business that needs the promotion because you're in fear of closing, let us know and we'll do our best. But there's like $1, $5, $10 sponsorship tiers in there. And all that money is just going to basically go to helping this podcast run and probably like future ticket show sales. So once again, we're not getting rich off of it. We're just trying to help out some businesses, get a little cash in return to help, keep the machine running. So.
Close it off. I'll be right back. 1 second.
Okay, cool. And if you're listening to us on a certain type of platform, whether it be SoundCloud, for example, you can also find us on iTunes, which is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, we really hope you enjoy this episode. And when promoting this episode, please use the hashtag Viva La Chico. And I'm sure, hopefully, we'll see you soon.